Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our Virtual Enlightenment Salon. We have now a weekly series of conversations with fascinating guests within the transhumanist and life extension. And today we have a contingent of our officers and also our member Alex Black, who are going to speak with Maitreya One. Now, first, let me introduce our officers. We have Ben Zion, who is our vice chairman and 2020 presidential candidate. We have Pavel Ilin, our secretary. We have David Shoemaker, who is our director of applied innovation. We have Charlie Kam, who is our director of longevity outreach, also our 2020 vice presidential candidate. We have John Carrots, our campaign director, and we have our ambassador Pam Keefe in Hong Kong, and Alexandria Black, as I mentioned, is one of our members and prior guests for our Virtual Enlightenment Salons. And now our guest of honor is Maitreya One. Maitreya One is a transhumanist hip-hop artist. To those of us in the community, we've been familiar with his work for about a decade. He is the CEO of the Superlongevity Institute, and recently he started a YouTube channel also under the name Maitreya One, which has been linked to in the description of the video on YouTube. So please go to his channel and subscribe. Now, welcome Maitreya One. Let's start with an overview of your YouTube channel so that you can tell our audience what have you been doing there, what do you expect to achieve with it, and what should people be on the lookout for in terms of further videos and discussions by you?
It's a blog. It's just some of my thoughts, and I'm trying to reach the hip hop community and bring them into life extension. Let them, know about life extension. Actually, every time I say something about life extension or I describe something in life extension, I also have a book so they can do further reading. And to be honest, to my surprise, I've gotten a lot of feedback. I was very surprised because I thought, that, since we're talking about technology and life extension, that I would get some type of resentment and resistance, not resentment, but some resistance from the hip hop community, which is actually not the case. Yeah. So
we've lost hip hop producer and a friend to the life extension and movement, Paul Maroon. Can you tell us a little bit about Paul?
Well, Paul Maroon, he had a vineyard in California. It's called Maroon Wines. And he's the one that gave me the wine deal because Nori Phillips in Australia had a wine that was enhanced with extra resveratrol. I was talking to him for years, and I was like, this got to come to the United States. This has to come in. And then he hit me back and was like, this was like for years I was talking to him. And then he found a distributor who was Paul Maroon. So I was like, he's like, Maitreya, go speak to Paul Maroon. Y'all could probably work out something. So I was like, all right. I spoke to Paul Maroon. They gave me a deal. And then Paul Maroon passed away of cancer. His brother is the doctor for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He wrote a book about Resveratrol and longevity. I actually have my library somewhere. I should have pulled it out.
Yeah, folks, our regular listeners are probably fairly familiar with Resveratrol, one of the a better life extension supplement strategies out there. I just thought I would say a little bit about that. For the folks who are not familiar, what is the connection between this kind of wine, Madeira wine, and life extension? Can we zero in on that a little
more? Madeira wine. Benjamin Franklin had made a quote when he was writing one of his friends that he wished he could be submerged in Madeira wine so he could see his country 100 years from now in the future. And so they didn't have the technology and the science of today, so he had to use the things that he was familiar with. But that's cryonics. That's just in his way
Yes, I want to read the quotation from Benjamin Franklin on this subject. He wrote, "I wish it were possible to invent a method of embalming drowned persons in such a manner that they might be recalled to life at any period, however distant, for having a very ardent desire to see and observe the state of America 100 years hence, I should prefer to an ordinary death, being immersed with a few friends in a cask of Madeira, until that time, then to be recalled to life by the solar warmth of my dear country. But in all probability, we live in a century too little advanced and too near the infancy of science to see such an art brought in our time to its perfection." So he was really looking forward to seeing the future. And there was another quotation where he laments having been born too soon and believing that within 1,000 years, science would achieve life extension to what he called an antediluvian standard. But he recognized in the 18th century that wasn't really a technical possibility. So it's a tragedy to some extent that we had these great minds in past eras that anticipated these potentialities, and we're looking forward to a world where this possibility for life extension or maybe reanimation would exist, but they realized it wouldn't come in time for them. And we cannot allow ourselves to be in the same situation.
Yes, I like what you said. This antediluvian standard, this biblical notion that people in ancient times lived many, many hundreds of years, like Methuselah of our Methuselarity, for example.
Mhm.
And I think that we are close to this antediluvian standard, closer than we are to say the reanimation that would be required to see someone like these number of noted cryonics clients brought back to us, and that's why I really value what you've said, Maitreya, and what you're trying to do to bring that notion of a universal super longevity to as many people as possible, because it really is a serious failing of our community, is that we're too laser focused on academia or the relatively small scale dissemination of white papers, the attending of conferences that are only really seen by some same few people preaching to the choir, so to speak. We need to find ways to get out of that echo chamber and inspire people to a universal super longevity, because the technology is quite nearly here, but the interest of the public is more limited.
Yes, indeed. It seems that it is easier right now to reach scientists and academics and have conversations with them on these subjects than it is to just cultivate a basic awareness within the general public. What we're seeing within the general public, from my experience, is not so much hostility, but simply a lack of recognition of the possibilities. They haven't read the kinds of books that you're recommending, Maitreya. They haven't listened to the key advocates of longevity, people like Ray Kurzweil and Aubrey de Grey and Bill Falloon. And so it's more of them not even grasping that this is an attainable goal within our lifetimes. So what are some of the methods, some of the strategies that you suggest for breaking through that unawareness barrier?
The first thing I think is that we need a movie. We have to bring Robert Ettinger's life to the big screen. It has to be a Hollywood movie. People watch movies, they listen to music. They're into art. I think if we bring Robert Ettinger's life story to the big screen, I think that will open up a portal that we didn't have before. And it will build a bridge for people who do not know or not even interested in life extension to those who do. Because I'm looking at Marvel is huge. You don't think Robert Ettinger is he's like a Marvel superhero. To me, he's just a real life Marvel superhero. So I think that we need to put his life on the screen. I think that's extremely significant. Extremely significant.
Hey, Charlie.
How that can happen, I don't know. I don't know.
Charlie's here.
Yes, Charlie has some experience with film production. Certainly, he's created some highly entertaining films about Ray Kurzweil and the singularity and radical life extension. So, Charlie, let's hear some of your ideas about how this could be brought to fruition.
Well, I think Maitreya is absolutely right. If we had a movie about Ettinger's life and what he's trying to accomplish, that would and to show specifically like where they show at the end of movies, you know, where they write about what the outcome of that person's life was or where it ended up and whether or not these things exist. Because, you know, I think the idea of cryonics isn't, like you say, it's not that there's a revulsion against it so much as there is just an unawareness. People don't even know. And when I've talked to people, just for example, cab drivers or Uber drivers or something about it, they're like they think it's they think it, well, is it, they say, wow, that sounds great, but I always just thought that was just science fiction. I just thought that was in, you know, movies, because it is. I mean, it's been in so many movies that it's not like people don't know about the idea of cryonic preservation. I've seen it as a plot point or vehicle for a lot of movies, but you know, we have to get it into the zeitgeist of the public that this is something that's actually available, that it's not science fiction. So to have a movie, you know, that's important. I do see though a lot of movies, or I should say TV shows now, that are you know, interactive with a lot of the technologies, like that TV show Upload, for example, which is on I think it's on Netflix or Amazon, one of those two. And
we were just talking about that in the pre-interview. That's a good one.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, you know, I mean, those kind of TV shows, and there's a lot of them now. You know, Black Mirror, even though it's dystopic, it really it shows a lot of that stuff. So I think if we can just invest those kind of things into the minds of the general public, it'll eventually just become something acceptable. It doesn't have to be such a shocking revolutionary thing. It just can be kind of bled into society piece by piece as it's happening. And then, you know, you're going to see it'll be more acceptable. My concern is that I think what's going to happen is there is going to be a tipping point for cryonics where people are going to see that that they don't want to see their loved ones die, and they would like to see that option. And when that tipping point occurs, where people start to finally accept it, there won't be enough places for them to be preserved. And from my understanding, Timeship, which is the one that's supposed to hold thousands of people at some point when it's finally constructed, is still underfunded, and I don't know when that's going to come about. So, you know, that at least that's, you know, that's my opinion on this stuff. I think it's I think Maitreya's though got absolutely the right idea. I do know, I think you mentioned, or I know in one of the videos I watched of Maitreya's, he talked about that book First Immortal by Halperin, which came out back in before 2000. It was in the late 90s. I was actually trying to secure the rights to that to see if we could turn that into a movie, but I think Hallmark Channel or something got to it before I did, and that was the end of it. But that you know, that's where I think it would be great to see if we can get that far.
Before we go back to the media thing, I want to say that oh, sorry, Charlie.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just want to say that we have a lot of 1 degree of separation from Ray Kurzweil here on the show. Yourself worked closely with Ray, as of course Maitreya knows him, and also Gennady knows him quite well. Interviewed him. I have to say I haven't met Ray. I know any number of his friends, but I will say that that moment in time when he was, as a most prominent of life extensionists, became the CTO of Google, it was a moment where I became a more ardent life extensionist myself. I regard it as a kind of crucial moment in 21st century history, to my thinking.
Yes, Ray Kurzweil is a great hero of our movement and for technological progress in general. He has a decades-long track record of successful inventions that have made it into the commercial market. So he's not just making predictions about the future, he's working to implement them. And I think to the extent that those predictions have come to pass, it's a credit to his own efforts in large part.
Yes, that's true. There's a lot more that can be done in service of super longevity culturally and technologically. But if anyone is at fault for not doing so, it's certainly not Ray Kurzweil. He's done an awful lot. We were talking about media relating to universal super longevity. It's in French, but you mentioned some Netflix and streaming programs. I would recommend Ad Vitam is a show. On the surface, it's a futuristic police procedural, but it is set in a world where universal super longevity has been achieved through biological means, and it's quite good, although not a hard science thought piece. In certain respects, I think it's quite good.
Yes, indeed. So we've been talking a lot about films and the cultural promotion of life extension, but we've also touched on the practical possibilities and the perceptions of the practical possibilities among the general public. And we've discussed how cryonics seems out of reach for a lot of people, in part because there's such limited capacity right now. In spite of life insurance, it's still a pretty hefty bill to be cryopreserved. With the Cryonics Institute, it's a 5-digit sum. With Alcor, it could be a 6-digit sum if you want a full body preservation, which is the only option that I would personally decide to pursue for various philosophical reasons. But for a lot of people, even with life insurance, that would seem like a financial burden. It seems one of the ways to alleviate that is through some sort of scale, where if you have a lot of capacity, then the marginal cost per individual cryopreservation would be a lot lower. And then funeral directors might start offering it as one of their options, in addition to traditional burial or cremation. So it seems the Timeship project is a key component of that goal of increasing capacity. And Maitreya, I wanted to hear more of your thoughts on the Timeship project, why it is important. What do you think needs to occur to make it happen? What have been some of your conversations with Stephen Valentine so that you could give us a bit of an inside perspective on it?
The Timeship project to me is our modern day pyramid, as what Dr. Michael West said in the Timeship book, in the foreword of the Timeship book. I feel like if we don't deliberately find a place where we plan on curing aging, it's not going to happen. And that's just my gut reaction. It's not even scientific. I'm going to be honest with you. It's just my gut feeling on that. And I think that it's a symbol of our unity as an architectural structure. So I think that we all should be working towards that, because I don't see anything better. I don't see any architectural structure that's going to hold somebody for 100 years with the security measures that went in it. I don't see anything better. I just don't. And like Gennady said, with capacity, anticipating that we're going to have more people into the cryonics, I think is a wonderful thing. But I think that all life extensionists should back the Timeship project. This should be our one goal, unifying fact, a unifying symbol. That's just my opinion.
Just to add a little bit of a background for folks who are not familiar with the Timeship project, it is a cryonics fortress, so-called that is intended to house 10,000 cryonics patients, and it is. And you mentioned, of course, Dr. Valentine and other the other developers of that project. We can share in the comments some articles on the subject as well.
Yes, so I am going to post an article in the comments. This was from July 2nd, 2016. I've posted it in the chat from Express News, San Antonio Express News. It's titled "Report: Work Begins on Cryonics Castle in Comfort," and there's an image of what this would look like, as well as a picture of the land that was purchased in order to facilitate this construction. There's a large mansion there on the property as well. Hopefully they'll preserve that and make it part of the complex. But architecturally, it looks quite interesting. It's one of those modern day monuments that I think we should really encourage to be built. It could be an iconic symbol of our movement and some of the hopes and aspirations of life extensionists. And I will say, personally, I think it's important to have this as an avenue for the people who may not make it to the age of longevity, escape velocity, because I myself hope never to take recourse to that option. And I know a lot of people older than myself, for instance, Dr. Jose Cordero, who is in his 50s, who believes that he will never have to die. But there are people in their 80s right now. There are people who have various stages of advanced illness or maybe even terminal illness. And if there's any possibility to preserve them, I would say that should be pursued. And Taylor B. in the comments notes, we also need to be open to other new biostasis technologies. I completely agree with that, in the sense that one of my reservations about cryonics as it is practiced today is the technique of vitrification, which is literally turning tissues into glass, is suboptimal from the standpoint of preserving some underlying continuity of bodily functions or processes that, in my view, is required for the preservation of the I-ness of the individual, the vantage point that you have upon the world. And one, it would be difficult to reverse that vitrification state. Two, if you do reverse it, are you going to, let's say, reignite the same awareness and consciousness, or are you going to start a new process of awareness and consciousness? And I say that,
Well, certainly the latter.
Yes, that's generally my view. And David, I'll get to you, but I will make one more comment. I think it's better than nothing. I think it's going to be maybe indistinguishable to the rest of the world, one way or the other. But for the self, it should matter, whether it's going to be you or somebody who thinks it's you, but you're not going to be aware of that person's experiences. But David, what did you want to say in this regard?
Well, thanks for bringing the subject up, because I think it's a great subject to talk about. For transparency, I am a cryonics member, so I bought into it and I pay to it. So I'm putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak. So what I did want to say about that, though, is I totally agree with your idea that it is better than nothing. The other choices that are available to you if you expire is being incinerated or being put in a hole in the ground. And both of those have 100% probability of not working. So the probability of cryonics, even in its current state, I think is less than 100% of not working, which makes it marginally, if not significantly, a better option statistically. However, something that we all have to choose for ourselves. I am not in my 50s and I'm not in my 60s, and I'm some a little older than that. So as I look at things like the longevity escape velocity, I may have fewer years to count than you do. I hope not. I would love to see something happen on this exponential scale of advancement, but it's not something that I can count on. Another thing, too, that I'm reminded of is while I was traveling internationally, I got word that a good friend of mine was in a very serious automobile accident. And that came out of nowhere. This is somebody that is also a longevity activist, somebody who takes very, very good care of themselves, better than I do, and I try. But what I'm trying to say is that whatever your age, you can't look at the amount of time that's left and say, well, gee, I think longevity escape velocity will be such and such a date, and either that will work for me or it doesn't. Because it's a false assumption to say that, yes, that will work for me, because there's just so many things that we can't control. I think that if we were able to perfectly repair our bodies using like the SENS concept and be able to repair everything as it goes, we're going to have to do more than that. Perhaps AI would be able to help us with things like traffic accidents and other such things. But nevertheless, there's still a variable there. So really, that's all I wanted to say is, yes, I agree with you. It's better than nothing. And for me, it's better than nothing to put my money into.
And you could say the same thing of the Timeship project, that these 50,000 and preserved bodies in what architect Stephen Valentine describes as the Fort Knox of biological materials, that this scaling up of that operation could hasten this reanimation framework, where we have achieved all the things required to see this path to longevity achieved. But that's still maybe many decades out, even if it is hastened somewhat. But popularizing the SENS approach or other approaches to physiological longevity could hasten that in the near term much, much more. It is the difference, I think, between seeing a life extension in the next 15 years or life extension in the next 30 or 40 years.
Yes, I agree with you, Ben. I think all of these approaches are ultimately complementary, and progress in one area is going to spur on interest and progress in the other areas as well. So if the SENS approach, for instance, begins to show a lot of successes in reversing various types of aging-related damage in humans, people are definitely going to pay attention, and they're going to say, well, how can I stay around long enough to benefit from this? And if some people think, oh, it's too risky to just rely on medical progress, they need a backup plan, they'll be more interested in cryonics. Likewise, if the Timeship succeeds, if there is a lot more capacity, if cryonics becomes more affordable, people are going to ask, well, what if I am in that state and then I need to be resurrected? What will be the technologies of damage repair that will be available at that time? And how can I make sure that if I'm resurrected, it'll be 2045 and not 2450 by the time that happens? So it's also interesting to note with cryonics, the later you go into cryopreservation, the sooner you will come out, because the preservation techniques of future time periods are going to be more reliable, and they're going to have fewer side effects. So the people who were preserved the earliest, like James Bedford, who was the first cryopreserved patient in 1967, they're going to come out last. Maybe in 2200, we'll have Dr. James Bedford with us again. But the longer you stay alive, even if you have cryonics as an option or a plan, even if that is what happens to you, the easier it will be for you to be reanimated.
Yeah. I also, did anybody want to say anything else? Because this.
No,
please.
go
I was
ahead.
just wondering, how do we balance the date we go in? Because we're also, the longer we go in, the more aged we are. But also the tech is better. So I just don't see where to balance that.
Well, my thought, Alex, is that any society that is able to reanimate cryonics patients will have the technology to reverse aging-related damage. And if they don't, by any off chance, they will just keep you in cryonic suspension until they can reverse that damage. So there would be some optionality there about when to revive any particular individual, depending on what the people of that time think they could achieve. So in my view, later is always better. Staying alive now for as long as possible is always the best choice, no matter what arrangements you've made for yourself. So Maitreya, what are your thoughts on what has been said?
I really believe in nanomedicine, just trying to fix things on a molecular level, but I know that's going to take a lot of time. This is why I think the timeship is important, because as a source of inspiration, because these scientists are gonna have to work in an environment that inspires them. Working in somebody's like back in the lab somewhere that's not they just need somewhere where they know it's for them, and that they can be inspired from. And I think that the timeship is that place. I really do. And I think that it'll build character in all the life extensionists to achieve this. We might be missing something in our character. We're going to have to work together on one project. We have to work on one project. The problem today is that everybody's scattered. We have social media. Everybody could do things on their own. They don't really need nobody. You could do your own media. You could do your own, you could write things. You could put your own media out. You could do everything on your own basically today with the technology. What are we doing to work on one thing? We need to work on one thing, and that will build character in all of us. We don't know. I feel like this Timeship project will be that thing that can help not only unite us, but bring out the best in us.
Yes, and these are very interesting thoughts. I think you've done a great job in connecting the life extension advocacy aspects of our movement to the cultural communication, the aesthetics, getting people interested, getting people enthusiastic about these kinds of efforts. And this is where art and music come in, films, literature, both fiction and nonfiction, as long as the nonfiction seeks to reach outward to a broader audience, to engage them, to fascinate them. And I agree also that the architectural vision of the Timeship, the scale of that ambition could be very interesting, very alluring to a lot of individuals. Now, there have been some comments in the chat that I would be interested in everyone's feedback on. So Paul Vasquez writes, cryonics technology will move parallel to the space race. Would not pushing that boundary be an approach that would allow for a wider audience? And I think one of the ideas that he is trying to articulate here is that for long-range space travel, where one is traveling to a planetary system that could be hundreds of light years away, within current biological human lifespans, that would be unattainable. But if there could be some sort of suspended animation for the astronauts, that could help them reach those worlds and then become reanimated upon arrival. It would be very challenging logistically, but do you see some synergies there, between those fields, cryonics and space travel, and how working on one of them could help advance the other?
I think they do in general, just from the standpoint that anytime we have a technology that is well accepted by the public, like the excitement around the launch this weekend,
Mhm.
I think generally promotes science. I don't know that science has the acceptance that I would really like to see. Going back to our guest's comment about movies and putting things in movies, I think ties into this as well, because first we see it in a movie, and then perhaps like with space technology, then we see it in reality. Tends to tie those things together. And I think it perhaps allows us to tie other technological things together. Cryonics would be one of those. SEN's repair approach, looking forward to nanobots and things of that nature. So I'm clearly in the camp that yes, I do see synergies there.
I think that's an interesting observation, David. And I want to call back Alex's question about the prospects for cryonic reanimation. There's almost no scenario that I'm familiar with where we are reanimated and there's a continuity, a corporeal continuity there. That's a new iteration of yourself in almost any scenario. Also, there's a lot of movie logic that we can't help but avoid in thinking about these things, and that's, I think, a very human failing. But it's why I like to think about this less in the terms of what can be achieved at some future time, and more in terms of what could be achieved with a certain dollar amount applied to it. So, for example, a somewhat similar, an analogous life extension strategy for a body transplantation, and there would be some other necessaries there. This could be achieved for about $1 billion, somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars range to conceivably today, or within 5 years. Whereas the reanimation project, this would cost maybe $100 billion or some trillions of dollars of R&D to develop that in any time frame. So that trillions of dollars represents an amount of money that could be applied to the popularization of life extension, or the development of life extension public health services around the world. I think that would be a better use of those funds if we're talking about what we're doing in the next 15, 20 years.
So
Hey,
I think,
can I play devil's advocate?
okay, go ahead.
Okay, playing devil's advocate. Why should we believe the future wants us? We're going to look less evolved to them.
Well, it's a matter of us getting educated about the future when we experience it, if there's a discontinuity. So they're not going to just throw us into the future world and say, well, here it is, figure out your own way. There are already programs for integrating people into some societies from other societies where they might have experienced, let's say, suboptimal conditions. For instance, if a North Korean refugee makes it over to South Korea, there's an extensive program there in South Korea for acclimatization, for getting the North Korean refugees familiar with how a market economy works, what educational opportunities there are in South Korea, what true history actually was. So they have quite an elaborate program to help these people integrate. Likewise, when West Germany and East Germany united, there were efforts to integrate the East German population. Right now, in a lot of European countries, there are programs for refugees where refugees from war-torn parts of the world get a certain amount of aid, they get educational opportunities. So they're not just thrown into the society and expected to sink or swim. There's some guidance, and one would hope if people in the future are more enlightened than most people today, they will see the importance of these kinds of efforts.
We should also say that this question reflects a serious concern. There are cryonics facilities that have gone belly up. Mm-hmm. There are people who had the understanding that they would be reanimated at some point, but those bodies are now rotting in the cold ground. And this idea that there will be a moral imperative or the resources to bring all of these people back, it's entirely possible, but it really does, to me, emphasize the fact that we need to do what we can to achieve a physical universal super longevity.
Yes, I agree. And any outcomes for cryonics patients are contingent upon future events. And certainly I'm not trying to posit some sort of linear dynamic of progress as we're seeing in the world today. Sometimes it's a road fraught with obstacles and disruptions and several steps back before we can take steps forward. But hopefully the long arc of history is going to be in our favor. And I agree, in the meantime, we should strive for physical super longevity in this world, live as long as possible, as healthily as possible. And my hope is everyone on this live stream right now would not have to resort to cryopreservation. We'll see if that is manageable. But at the same time, reorienting the culture toward thinking that this is quite a valid option, and this is an option that's going to be as supported by our institutions as a lot of contemporary funeral practices are, will be important. Charlie, you and I have spoken about this before, where you mentioned to me that even a few decades ago, cremation was considered to be a kind of fringe option, but then when funeral directors began to offer it, it became widely accepted, and you expressed the hope that the same could be occurring for cryonics with enough advocacy.
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't until about 1960s, early to mid 1960s, when the only thing in the United States, or at least 90% of what they would do with people when they died, was burial, because cremation was still expensive, and it was also because it was also kind of considered I don't know for a better term, but blasphemous, or something that wasn't really good. However, once the price point came down on cremation in the 60s, where they were able to cremate people for about $1,000, whereas the average for a funeral cost was somewhere around 5,000. Well, economic tendencies, everybody just started saying, hey, that's not so bad after all. There's nothing blasphemous or bad about that. Let's just cremate grandpa because it's a lot cheaper. But and interestingly, right at the same time, the 60s is when cryonic preservation kind of erupted, as you just mentioned, with the first freezing of the first person. But the problem was it was about, it was 50,000 at that, which was enormous. And I think the problem, of course, was that not even so much that it was unacceptable, because, at that point, cremation wasn't acceptable. But why do you think cremation, exploded? Because right now, more people get cremated than get buried. The reason, I believe, is not because there was anything strange about cryonics, it's because of the cost. I mean, we live in a capitalist world, and people don't want to spend that kind of money, and they think that, why would I freeze someone as opposed to burial? Even though if you would have went to someone and said, hey, look, you love grandpa, right? Yeah, well, he's dying, and we got a choice here. We can burn him, bury him, or freeze him. Now, if we burn him in cremation, he's never coming back. If we if we bury him, he's not coming back. If we freeze him, well, maybe he'll come back. Well, I imagine most families would probably say, yeah, let's go with that one. I love Grandpa. Let's bring him back. It's okay, great. It's 50,000. You know, they would say, well, you know, maybe Grandpa had a pretty good life, and you know, most people don't want to feel like they're terrible people, so they're going to start to rationalize and justify various excuses as to why they should just, you know, probably bury him or cremate him. And you know what? Cryonics was probably weird and it's crazy. So I think it got a strange stigma for a long time because, you know, capitalist people and people in the world, I don't mean to sound people are terrible, but they don't want to feel bad about themselves or guilty that they didn't do the right thing because maybe they couldn't afford it, or it was just, you know, so expensive that it was going to change things badly for them. But I think once the price point of cryonics comes down, it's going to be very acceptable to a lot of people. And another thing I wanted to add, it seems like this conversation was discussing cryonics and other forms of life extension as an either or, and I don't see it that way at all. I think cryonics is completely a backup to all those. I think you should have those simultaneously. It's almost like if you get in a car and start driving and say, well, you know, I signed up with life extension technology, so I don't need car insurance. Right. Well, you know, that's silly because you remember 150,000 people die every day, but you know, 100,000 dies from aging. But those other 50,000 die from accidents or from war or from murder, from things that, you know, are not aging, and you can't account. And that's almost a third of the people that die every day. If they had cryonics policies, well, then they'd at least have a chance. So I think we got to be clear about the difference between cryonics and, you know, life extension. They're not really the same in the sense that one is, you know, going to actively, you know, if you take resveratrol, maybe that'll keep you alive longer. But if you get hit by a car tomorrow, you better have that cryonics policy up and running. Another thing I wanted to point out that I think Ben mentioned, but I wanted to just challenge a little bit, is he said it would take, you know, $1 trillion or a lot of money to spend on reanimation. But you got to remember, with cryonics, the whole point of it is that if you're cryonically preserved, your body goes into into stasis where you're not having no degradation of your structure. So you could be preserved for decades. And that would mean that the idea of reanimation technology, whether it's nanotechnology or pico technology or something, that price point could be zero, or it could be really, really, really low. So we don't have to spend current value dollars on the idea of reanimation when we're talking about a technology that, you know, it's inherent in its definition that we're not going to be reanimating people now, but we're going to do it when the technology is not only perfected, so that addresses, you know, Alex's issue, but also the price point would be, you know, very, very cheap. So it is affordable. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say.
You know, that's an interesting observation about this as a sort of. I do believe that that cryonics should be viewed as something akin to a human right, and you know, it occurs to me that about the money that the United States spends on funerary services of a kind which I would regard to be largely I hate to say frivolous, but it doesn't provide any real medical or value. That amount of money could fund 20% of a public health service in the United States. That's to say, if we were able to wave a magic wand and reappropriate those funds, that would go a long way toward real public health outcomes. And I regard this idea that people should have cryopreservation with a similar exigency, that should be how this money is being spent. But I do feel that we should see that a good deal more resources goes to a physiological longevity outcomes. While we're on the subject of life extension, while she's still on the call, I want to welcome Pam Keefe, the United States Transhumanist Party foreign ambassador from Hong Kong. She hails from this blue zone locale where the average life expectancy is 7 years longer than that here in the United States, about 85 years. And how are you, Pam? Can you hear us? Maybe we waited too long.
Yes. Well, we'll get back to Pam later. I just wanted to say I agree with a lot of the comments regarding the synergies of various technologies, both within the life extension arena, so biological reversal of aging-related damage, as well as cryopreservation, could go hand in hand. Also, technologies and other areas that give rise to public interests. So space travel, certainly the recent launch by SpaceX was quite inspiring to many people. And just being in a general environment where technology is rapidly progressing and we have highly visible accomplishments will lead people to be more open to possibilities for progress in the future, and will lead them to think, well, if we've done these great things, what about great achievements in other fields? Perhaps they won't seem to be as science fiction-like anymore, and they'll be seen more as a tangible reality that could be achieved within the next few years or decades. So, Maitreya, what are your thoughts on everything that has been said?
I agree with what Charlie Cam was saying, but I just wanted to add, and I know this is going to come from left field, but I think that as transhumanists, as life extensionists, if we don't rise to the level of self-government, that's another problem. We have to, I know this sounds crazy, but I have to say it anyway. We need a land base or a seastead to work. That's the only, our character has to be reflected in the laws and institutions where we're at if we're going to continue this thing on. Most of us are not going to make the cut. I'm just going to keep it real. Most of us is going to be cryopreserved. We're not going to make the cut. What do we tell our children of the life extension movement to inspire them to reanimate us? We need to have our own secure land base or seastead so we can perpetuate what we about. So our legacy can go on and people can be inspired to want to reanimate us in the future. Because us being scattered like this, we need to concentrate our power and be in one place. I really feel that way. I don't know how we're going to do it. It's a big idea, but I believe we're going to have to take it to the level of self-government eventually. Eventually. Even the Mormons have their own state, right? Doesn't the Mormons have their own state? It's called the Mormon state. Am I right or wrong?
Well, Utah was originally intended to be a Mormon state. Before that, it was the Utah Territory, and it actually included what is today Nevada. So some of the earliest settlers in northern Nevada were actually Mormons. However, it kind of evolved from that point to be, let's say, a more universal type of community for people. So Utah most certainly is not exclusively Mormon right now, and it is as cosmopolitan as any other US jurisdiction. But I'm sympathetic to the idea of a transhumanist jurisdiction. Indeed, the US Transhumanist Party strongly supports seasteads and micronations within its platform, and there's precedent in transhumanist literature. You're well aware of this, Maitreya, since you promoted this book, The Transhumanist Wager by Zoltan Istvan.
I love that book.
Yes.
We this basic sentiment that you both of you gentlemen have described. It was the main motivation for our undertaking to see that Argentina, and specifically the city of Buenos Aires, make a declaration in favor of a super longevity. And that's not dissimilar from the APPG project for longevity in London. The all-party parliamentary group for longevity was set up by a number of noted politicians with a similar idea to add years and years of healthy wealth span by 2035. And that is also a high level proposal. And I think that we are at this moment in history now where this kind of thing, maybe not an independent transhumanist state, but some inroads along those lines can be achieved. Life extension initiatives like the one that we proposed to the health minister of Argentina, who has met with our organizers down there a number of times. The mayor has looked very favorable at this proposal. And a declaration of this kind could lead to an awful lot of access on the part of the life extension community to resources, but equally important exposure for the life extension project. And I would encourage people to, if you haven't signed up, have a look at that. I'm adding it to the comments right now. Also I'll add the APPG project, a little background on that as well. This idea of a transhumanist state, maybe it's not beyond the realm of possibility given this state of the world today, but certainly things along these lines are in the offing in the next coming decades.
I'm just saying, I mean,
I have a question.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
May I ask you, Maitreya, about Timeship? Are there any plans for independent power for it? Because, you know, the refrigerators go off and we're done. So how could you sustain Timeship indefinitely away from the grid?
Well, it doesn't have, the Timeship doesn't have a lot of parts. And the way it was said to me is that it can be operational for 100 years off the grid. I forgot exactly how that can happen, but Steve Valentine told me himself that it can be off the grid for at least 100 years. And the way the doors are built, you don't even need electricity. It's something crazy like that. Like you don't even need an outside power source. They can run on its own for at least 100 years. I forgot exactly how it's done, and I should have been more prepared. But yeah,
they do it through a form of maintaining with liquid nitrogen.
Yeah,
and so they don't need the kind of electricity that I think Alex is thinking of when she mentions it, because they don't. It's different than just plugging in a refrigerator or something like that.
Sorry, I'm daft about the details.
No, that's fine. It's just, but I mean, obviously, it's a different technology than most people are aware of. But I've talked to the people at Alcor and Cryonics Institute, and it kind of runs on. It's different than just, you know, where they don't rely on the electric. The way Maitreya is describing it, he's accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's definitely an important engineering set of challenges to address. How do you enable such a structure to operate despite disruptions, which could happen to the power supply or other infrastructure from natural disasters or even the decisions of authorities? But it looks like a lot of thought and a lot of planning has gone into that. Now, Maitreya, I wanted to get more of your thoughts on this concept of the hip hop state that you've been promoting in your works. And we touched on this a bit already. The idea would be it would be its own jurisdiction, perhaps on a seastead or through other technologically enabled means that would be transhumanist in nature. How would it be governed in your view, and what role would hip hop play in it?
Well, I can't really give out where I think it will be placed. One thing I can say is that as the Superlongevity Institute is a preservation society that I want to preserve hip hop culture for further generations. And so the only way, I think one of the ways to do that is through science, technology, and by having our own land base. How I think that by using, I don't think we need government like that no more. I really don't. I think that we can use AI. I learned a lot from a guy named Jack Fresco with the Venus Project. I like a lot of the things that Jack Fresco was saying in his book, The Best Money Can't Buy. And using AI to do most of the work, to do the labor. And I don't think that I kind of look at hip hop. I hate to say this, but I look at the hip hop state like the Vatican. The Vatican is a small city in Italy, but it's still a part of Italy, right? That's how I look at the hip hop state. I kind of look at it in that kind of way as far as jurisdiction is concerned. You know, how it would be governed, that's not for me up to decide. That's for the whole hip hop community to decide. I don't have all the answers. I have some opinions on that, but I will need more help with the hip hop nation to be able to figure that one out. It's hard enough to get them to think about themselves as a sect of people that are specific in nature, and it's hard enough to get them to think to want to live in their own hip hop city where their culture is reflected. It's hard enough to get them to think like that. So I'm trying to promote that idea to them, as well as life extension, which is kind of hard, you know. And these ideas are so huge. It seems like, and who am I? I'm just a humble guy, right? I mean, I'm just a humble guy. I mean, I come from a humble place, but so is hip hop. If you look at the state seal that I didn't really design it. I just adopted it, right? You see the turntables without a DJ holding up the turntables with just a crate, because I want to remind hip hoppers of their humble beginnings. We were from humble beginnings, so we generate billions of dollars a year. People sell their deodorant, they sell their clothes, but why we can't have our own hip hop city? I wouldn't mind riding in a bullet train with graffiti on it. I just, you know, I don't, you know, cultures need land base to be further developed and preserved. That's just my thinking. Maybe it's just, you know, I don't know. That's just how I think.
What do you think are some synergies between hip hop culture and super longevity that could help build greater acceptance of our ideas within the hip hop movement?
Well, because hip hop is it's at its tipping point, because when you look at our goals, our first goal was to go mainstream. We wanted industrial status symbols. Yeah, I don't really care for them, but it's a natural progression, right? Now we wanted to go platinum, we wanted to go mainstream. Now what? If we don't have another goal and another vision beyond the goals that we already set for ourselves, we'll cease to exist, in my opinion. The lack of vision, and you will perish. I believe that. So I believe that now a platinum success is for a hip hop. I'm a hip hopper. That's my identity, right? As a hip hopper, a platinum plaque is an industrial status symbol is no longer a goal for us. It's not a reward for us. To me, a hip hop city is, and that's what I'm promoting now. In the hip hop. And as far
when we say the word hip hop city, the one thing that really comes to mind is Akon City. Akon, a philanthropist and hip hop artist of great renown, has developed not only something that may have some of the kind of autonomy that we're describing, but also Akon City is going to be powered by a cryptocurrency which is self-poised to be accepted across the African continent. And this is a kind of development, you know, the idea of convincing folks to live in a new place, sometimes it's an undertaking fraught with difficulty, but there are situations where this sort of thing, the prospects look a little bit rosier. And this could very well be one of them, Akon City in Senegal. I did a few podcasts on the subject. I'd like to do some more. If anybody would like to talk about that project at a later time, I'd love to chat with you.
That may be a subject for a subsequent Enlightenment Salon. But thank you for bringing that up. And Maitreya, what did you want to say in this regard?
Let me make a side note, right? The thing about inner city folk, people that grew up like myself, we don't really have an identity. Hip hop is our only identity. And Black scholars, I fight with Black scholars all the time. Black scholars will say, when we came from Africa, we lost everything. But to me, they won't admit that hip hop is the refinding of whatever was lost when we came over here as slaves. To me, hip hop is the refinding of whatever was lost in ancient Africa, wherever. And this is why it's important to preserve it.
Maitreya, I wonder if you know a buddy of mine. He's in Cloak and Dagger. His name is Jason Hickson.
That sounds familiar.
Anyway, I wanted to shout out to him. Cloak and Dagger, KLOKDAGR.
I don't.
Shout out to Jason. I just tagged on this. Okay, that's it.
So I wanted to bring in some information that I think could be persuasive to a lot of people in the hip hop community and in the Black community more generally, because I think there are some people who could be real heroes of that community and icons of super longevity. Some of the longest living Americans in all of history have been Black women. Indeed, Susanna Jones, who died in 2016 at the age of 116 years and 311 days, she was a Black woman from Alabama who then spent much of her life in New York, and she died there. She is the third oldest American ever to be alive. And then the fourth oldest American ever to be alive was Gertrude Weaver, another Black woman. And then Geraldine Talley, the seventh oldest American to be alive, another Black woman. So there's a history of super longevity in this community. And I think sometimes it's underappreciated, but a lot of these individuals have a desire for life, and they have a desire to prolong it, and they've lived long and healthy lives. Maitreya, in your impression, how many people within the hip hop world are aware of these extraordinary supercentenarian women?
Not many. I don't think anybody's really focused on that. And I think that is a big, the problem with hip hop right now is that it's been caught by the mainstream, right? You know, when people refer to hip hop, they really referring to our elements. I am hip hop. I'm not. Being an MC, an artist, is just an element of the culture. It's not the culture itself, right? And so, we have a history of wanting to become immortal. When the Egyptians mummified themselves, right? That was the early attempts to become immortal, and this is what's missing. We need a timeline. I think I need to do a timeline in the next episode and show all these different cultures. You got China, the first emperor of China. You got Nikolai Fedorov in Russia. You have I want to show all these people all around the world who wanted to pursue living a long time, so people can see that this is not something that's out of the ordinary. It's part of our history. And when I hear Black scholars talk, they never talk about any of these people wanting to become immortal. They always skip past that because they're kind of embarrassed about that. It's like blasphemy that the Egyptians' early attempts on wanting to become immortal, and by being mummified, that was their attempt to become immortal. They kind of skip over that, you know? So on the next episode, I'm going to talk more about that, because I think that's really important to link that time period with what we're trying to do here. Because the thing with people, Black people, if you don't show them something in the past that they were trying to do in the past, then they're not going to really, they're going to be like, oh, well, so what? I mean, we never tried it before. We're not going to try it. Then they're going to just skip over it, you know. But if you show them like a mark in history, a point in history where we were trying to do something, they'll be more open to it.
Yes, indeed. I completely agree with you. And I think cultivating that historical awareness is crucial, because there are many figures within the Black community, both in past centuries and in recent years, who ought to be highlighted as heroes of super longevity, as people in the pursuit of indefinite life extension, or at the very least, very long lives who should be looked up to and who should be emulated, and not just by the Black community, by everybody. These supercentenarian women I mentioned, they should be role models to us all. Their lives should be celebrated, and we should be trying to learn what they did, how they managed to live as long as they did, and what can be done for us to emulate this.
To be honest with you, I don't even consider myself, I mean, my skin is Black. I consider myself hip hop. And that's a human culture. Everybody participates in our elements all around the world. Hip hop is a unifying force. I know y'all hear me talking crazy on the internet and on, but personally, you know, sometimes I just do say stuff just to get people jogged up. But my personal heart of heart views is hip hop is a human culture, and our elements are shared with all types of people who look differently all around the world. We can come together. Back in the days, they said, what's those guys from Funkadelic? They said we can all unite underneath the funk. Well, hip hop is the same thing. We can unite underneath this banner called hip hop. It's a unifying force.
Yes, and those are inspiring words. I recall you had an interview with Ford Fisher back in 2017, and you went into great depth about the background of hip hop, and you mentioned the differences between the term hip hop and the term rap. And in your view, hip hop originates from this community that you're trying to advance, but rap was something that was imposed upon it by the commercial industry. Would you care to elaborate upon that and the distinctions between those two terms?
Well, hip hop and the MCing is just one of our elements, right? Hip hop is the culture. We are hip hop. That's our identity. That's our blanket. But MCing, that's another thing I would like to say. Yeah, it is the corporate structure that wants to make the MC the most important part of our culture, right? And I like to say people are stuck in the raptism because that's all they could do is rap. They can't do any graffiti. They can't do any of our other elements. And mostly it's because these people are coming from neighborhoods that are victimized and that are poor. So they use the desperate part of our culture, of our people, to put all this garbage on the TV. And that's what people think hip hop culture is all about. And it's not. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to show that that's not what it's about. Another thing, when you see in print media, right? If you see when they put Chinese or Japanese, they put a capital J, a capital C. When they put hip hop, it's a lowercase h with a dash in between. This needs to stop. It's spelled HIPHOP. H has to be capital. The H has to be capital. Whenever you're speaking about a significant group of people, an ethnic group, it's always spelled with a capital. Hip hop should be recognized in the same light. In the same light as a Japanese person, as a Chinese person, because to me, we're a new sect of people. I know that sounds crazy. I mean, our elements, the way we're doing things are different. You know, we're writing on walls. This is a significant group, and we're not Black. We're not none of that. We're hip hop. We're a new sect of people, and that's how I approach it.
So yes, this was a very interesting discussion of a culture that I think a lot of us are not as familiar with as you are, Maitreya, but thank you for bringing that perspective in. And my hope is that culture becomes more interested and invested in the pursuit of super longevity through your efforts and the efforts of those within that culture who are sympathetic to it, because it does seem like there's a lot of source material, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of inspiration that can be drawn upon in that regard. And furthermore, as you said, this is a unifying idea because we all want to live longer and healthier lives. We all want to also lead more peaceful and prosperous lives. I think those are shared universal human goals. And the more different cultures and cultural approaches there are toward those goals, the likelier we are to unify humanity in their pursuit and get this widespread cross-cultural recognition that these are desirable ideals to strive towards. So everyone else in the discussion, what are your thoughts on the hip hop culture and its role within the promotion of indefinite longevity?
Well, this idea of a cultural revolution toward a techno-futurist community, I think it's the lifeblood of who we are. And there was a question in the comments from Paul Vasquez. He said, "What is a benefit to be gained by a community of this kind in having some autonomy, and what would be the drawbacks?" And I'd like to just speak for one moment to those two scenarios. There's a novel that I really loved called Accelerando. And there's some adventurers, people who've attained super longevity, who leave Earth in that story. And they come back relatively few short years later to find it rather like this cryonics scenario that was described by a few people earlier. The world is very radically different. And this is because the network effects of all of these folks working on new technologies and acceleration effects had continued on Earth, but had not continued for them, having left Earth, just being a few folks. And that is, I suppose, a consideration for people who want to leave civilization behind in any context. But the other side, and I think the more real side of something like that, is we need a universal super longevity public health service somewhere. And we need other things like a smart city that's devoted to full automation and devoted to economic policies that are truly sustainable, that no one else in the world has a dedication to, but the ardent techno-progressive. And this is something that we can achieve because we're the ones who are willing to do it. And that's an important focus. And so this is something that to my way of thinking, has to be at the center of any discussion of our communities as techno-futurists and so forth.
Can I point out the elephant in the room? This last week has been just setting all our goals back in every way. All our future, all our sovereignty is going out the window.
Well, I think, Alex, it speaks to the need for venues like this, where we have these kinds of conversations in a civil manner, where we exchange ideas, where we think about paths toward a better world. And what we're doing now is what everybody should be doing to resolve their differences and figure out essentially, how do we achieve this better future? How do we achieve a world in which there is no injustice, no violence, no brutality, where all people's rights are respected, and where we have a greater awareness of what unites us rather than what divides us. And super longevity, I think, is one of those unifying ideals that is for everybody, that is irrespective of skin color or socioeconomic background or religion or lack of religion or nationality. None of this matters. We're all human. We're all subject to the same flaws of our biology. We all have this clock of aging that's ticking within us, and we all need to fight it. We all need to fight aging and not one another, as our guest for next week, Jim Stroll, is quite fond of saying, and we will mention him at a later juncture in this conversation as well. But I think we need to spread awareness of this venue and of the good work of the US Transhumanist Party in bringing these dialogues to the public, and hopefully we can do our part, however modest it is given our current resources, to shift the discourse away from violence and confrontation and toward peaceful collaboration of all peoples. And I wanted to ask Maitreya also, because this is a curiosity that's been expressed by some of our commentators. Jason Geringer says, explain more, please, about how hip hop is more than just a kind of music. How is it different than, say, rock and roll culture? So he wants to know essentially all of these other aspects of the hip hop culture that most people don't associate with it. But Maitreya, please enlighten us.
That's a great question. Does rock and roll have a writing system? We have. Let me just. Can you see the styling of writing? That's how simple writing. But we have wild style. You can't even read it. It's like hieroglyphics. We have a style. You couldn't even, if I showed it to you, only certain people could read it. We have a whole writing system. Our dance moves is different. We have dance moves that's different. Rock and roll, they were dancing, but they weren't dancing specifically like we were. The political climate was different when rock and roll came out. That's the only reason why it's not looked at in a certain light. We have a writing system. We have a different way of speaking. Our language is different. If I'm speaking to another hip hop, you might not know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you. You might not even know what I'm talking about if I'm speaking to another hip hopper. Straight up. Our writing system, us writing on the walls, that's ancient. All humans did that. That's ancient. And I'm going to be honest with you, and this might sound crazy. I'm going to say it anyway. Hip hop to me is our genetic response to oppression. That's how I feel about it. That's my gut thing. The political climate was ripe enough for hip hop to come about. You had all these different things that were going on in inner cities all over the world. All over the world, they were going through the same thing. And they took, but specifically in the South Bronx, they took the books. What they did is they took the music out of they took the instruments out of the school system. Guess what we did? We used turntables. And guess who was the first people that were against hip hop? Older Black people. They said, what is that strange noise, that cutting noise you were using with the turntable? What is that strange? You can't get no money off of that. Early hip hoppers said, yes, we believe in this. This is our culture. Early hip hoppers didn't make any money. Our histories are different from rock and roll too. Hip hop is the transformation of all subjects and objects. We see other people. This is how other people approach turntable. Our approach to the world is different. Other people looked at the turntables, put the record on the turntable, and stepped back. We looked at the turntable as an instrument. You get it? Our vision, our approach is different. Early hip hoppers were illegal. We were illegal. Why? Because we powered our huge sound system with the street light. I did that. We seen the street light. Other people say, oh, the street light is just going to light up the dark. We said, no, that's a power source. You think we're the same? We're not the same. We are not the same. We are not the same. Rock and roll is a music genre. Hip hop is a culture. We're not the same. Our approach to the world is different. That's what makes us different.
So this is fascinating because of many reasons, but one reason is that in the hip hop culture, there's this creative use of technology, this use of everyday objects for purposes very different from what they were originally designed for, but they achieve a very interesting result. And I think that is very much in the spirit of transhumanism as well. How do we harness the aspects of the natural world and the man-made world in ways that alter and improve our length and quality of life? So there's another synergy there from what you were discussing.
Definitely, definitely. And hip hop, we have something to offer. Because of our unique history, we have something to offer that may be missing. Like I said, our history, Can you imagine being a ghetto child? You have no money, no resources. They took the music out of the school system. They flooded our communities are flooded with drugs. The drug dealer and the killer live right next door to you. They live right next door. How are you going to get out of that? You have no resources. How are you going to get out of that? You have, that turns on a different sight. That turns on a different inner sight. Nothing mystical, just our strategy is different on how we view the world. It's just, you know, we'll take something and flip it to, so we'll take something that's usually we use in the common world and we'll flip it to our benefit to get ahead, to get us out of the situation we're in. So that's hip hop in a nutshell, man.
Yes, the spirit of innovation too is very prominent in what you said. And I have observed recently, especially in response to the COVID-19 lockdowns, the limitations of opportunity that many people faced, that nonetheless there has been a flowering of creativity, a redirection of creativity. In my neighborhoods where I run around, I see a lot of painted rocks. I see some beautiful art on the sidewalks. And this is just the spontaneous creation of people who were faced with constraints, they were faced with difficulty, but nonetheless, they were determined to use their talents to create something beautiful. And I think in a lot of ways, the expression within the hip hop culture can be an example of that. And I like what you're doing with it, Maitreya One, because you're channeling it in these productive directions. You're trying to see what benefits to humankind, what ways out of these terrible predicaments that you described this kind of culture can offer.
I'm gonna be honest, I'm not the best spokesperson in hip hop, but I looked around and I said, nobody's talking like this. I don't even like to be public. If you watch my videos, I struggle with being, I don't like talking in public. It's not my thing. But I feel a responsibility to get this out. That's what pushes me. I don't want to be I'm a guy that likes to be in the background. I don't want to be in the front. I don't want to be in front. I'd rather just do my music on a low, people hear it. I'm not a front type of guy. I like to be in the background. I just feel a responsibility to get this out there. I'm putting myself out there, and I know that it comes with some resistance, and some people are not gonna like that. With some of these ideas, they're not gonna like it. But you don't grow if there's no resistance. You're not gonna grow. So I just look at it like that.
Well, keep up the good work. I think anytime anybody stands up for a worthwhile cause, a worthwhile set of projects, there are going to be naysayers. Certainly, we in the transhumanist community have encountered our fair share of naysayers, but that doesn't mean our goals and our endeavors are not worthwhile. It could mean quite the contrary, that we're doing something innovative, we're doing something potentially groundbreaking, and some people don't like that, some people are afraid of it. But yes, Maitreya, keep up the good work, and we're getting a lot of good reception to what you just said. The Adventures of Star Citizen has stated, I think it's great that you're putting your perspective out there, Maitreya. It allows people to learn different perspectives other than the ones that are already out there. And I completely agree with that. Now, for our officers and others in this meeting, what are your thoughts regarding hip hop culture and the types of synergies that Maitreya described with transhumanism and human creativity and creative uses of technology?
Well, the earlier, Gennady, you mentioned us drawing inspiration, us as a society drawing inspiration from related undertakings that could promote life extension, despite not being super longevity projects specifically. And I think of again, Ray Kurzweil is somebody who's done that in a more specific context. this hip hop artist Akon is someone who is brought electricity, brought people out of the darkness and into the light in the many tens of millions through his philanthropic work. And not everyone can be Maitreya One or Gennady Stolyarov. Certainly not everyone can be a Ray Kurzweil or an Akon, but we can all take this basic idea of accelerationism and being an agent provocateur of this kind to heart. Anyone can come up with an idea that challenges people's assumptions and is techno-futurist in nature. I don't want to speak out of turn, but a few months ago, about 2 months ago, Chairman Stolyarov and I had a fight. And we were talking a little bit about my biolab developing a lab-grown meat, and how that growth of that lab-grown meat could reflect upon the community.
Argued with you too.
I would encourage people to think in terms of things that are not harmful, but that do excite and challenge people's assumptions that are technologically techno-progressive or techno-futurist in nature. Anyone can embark upon projects of this kind. Anyone can perhaps find themselves in a situation to be a tastemaker, and maybe be then doing. Akon is a wealthy man today, but I consider him to be a billionaire, not in the sense that he has accrued $1 billion, but in the sense that he has helped quite nearly 1 billion people in his efforts. And I think that anybody can put themselves on a trajectory of this kind by thinking very carefully and undertaking techno-futurist projects.
So, Pavel, what are your thoughts on these issues?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I receive a lot of critics about the transhumanist movement as a movement of the white rich people, and I think by bringing people from different backgrounds and outside of academic and traditional business backgrounds, will help us to build a more inclusive and more diverse community. And I agree with Maitreya about the bringing resources of the many people rather than one billionaire. Because if you work only with one billionaire, this person would be in control, and he would be in control who to reanimate from cryonic preservation, how to redistribute the longevity therapies. But if we have a community of the people, of the many people, and if we have a decentralized, organized community, it will be much harder to hold off this technology and to provide access to the technology as wide as possible. Yeah, I also would be in favor of establishing some sort of transhumanist jurisdiction. That was my why I reached out to Maitreya initially. It was my selfish and weak attempt to build the local transhumanist communities, to start working on building a local transhumanist community, because I also live in New York City, and I would dream to see a transhumanist city or state or island or something like that, where we can work on building the brighter society and brighter future.
Yes, indeed. I think the achievement of such a jurisdiction anywhere in the world is going to be a watershed moment for our movement. It would enable the kind of technological innovation and experimentation that we need to occur at the pace at which we need it to occur, to ensure that longevity, escape velocity arrives for all of us. And I agree with your comments, Pavel, about diversity and inclusion also, because again, our ideas are universal. They would benefit every human being if they were implemented. And so there's no reason why they should be limited to any particular demographic or from any particular demographic. Transhumanism has this inherent intuitive appeal, I think, if only people were to become sufficiently aware of it. And Maitreya is doing a great job helping to popularize it. And also if people could see some of the misconceptions and misrepresentations of transhumanism in the popular media as being what they are, essentially misrepresentations. That is important as well, because you mentioned, Pavel, hearing some comments, oh, transhumanism is a movement exclusively for rich white men. And I think we are a refutation of that in the US Transhumanist Party. We've talked in the past about our organization being for the so-called working class transhumanists because our membership is free. You don't have to pay anything to join us. We don't have any barriers to you being a member no matter where in the world you reside. Certainly, we take no consideration of skin color or national origin, and we welcome people of all genders or no gender identity. It doesn't matter to us. We want people to live longer and better, whoever they are. And this is for all humankind. We want it to be affordable. We want it to be disseminated to as many people as possible in as rapid a time frame as possible. We certainly do not support a world where a few people hoard those technologies to themselves, but we also don't think it would really be possible to have a world in which all people hoard those technologies to themselves. Just as with cell phones, it wasn't possible for a few multi-millionaires and billionaires to be the only cell phone users just because that happened to be the case at one point in time during the late 1980s. The technology does tend to spread with increased public awareness, increased consumer demand, and increased competition among companies in the market to bring products to large numbers of people, as long as those businesses see a desire, a demand for those products from the public. And I think one of our roles in the US Transhumanist Party is to help cultivate that demand side. Get people to want radical life extension. Get people to want to see projects like the Timeship built. And when we get that desire, when we transform it into a mass movement, I think it will overwhelm all the other mass movements in its importance. If we do our job correctly, then what people will be demonstrating in the streets about is acceleration of longevity research. They will have demonstrations, peaceful demonstrations, saying, we want more science funding now. We want the FDA barriers to research lifted now. That's what people should be demonstrating about. And that's what I hope they will be demonstrating about in the coming years. Now, I wanted to also bring in a comment from Sylvester Geltmeyer, because I think that relates to the cultural conversation we've been having. He writes, we have so much popular culture that mainly tells the story of a dystopian future world. What ideas do any of you have that help us tell within the popular culture a better transhumanist story? And Charlie had mentioned previously an abundance of films and TV series that mention these seemingly futuristic technologies, but some of them approach them from a dystopian angle. And I think that negatively colors people's perceptions of what is possible and what is desirable. So what are your thoughts on how to overcome this seeming preponderance of dystopian science fiction?
Well, this is
are you talking to me or?
Anyone who wants to, but Charlie, feel free to chime in.
Oh, yeah, no, because you mentioned my name, and I was just going to say, yeah, I agree with the statement, that there is a lot of it's mostly dystopic, but that's part of Hollywood. They have to have a drama, otherwise, there's no conflict and there's no TV show or movie. So they have to kind of go that way. That's why when I ever done any of my music videos or films, I've always tried to avoid that. I tried to make them in a much more lighthearted or pleasant sense, always with a good outcome, shining a good light on technologies that could help us all. That's why I was happy to see a show like Upload, which really is for the most part is a pleasant type of thing. I do want to say that I think what I like about what Maitreya had talked about right in the beginning of this was about the idea of getting a movie out there, and I think getting the hip hop culture involved is a great way to expand this, and I think getting celebrities to get involved would be a great way to do this. I know that one of the biggest one of the most successful hip hop artists in the world is will.i.am, and will.i.am is a big fan of Ray Kurzweil. He's actually a fan of Kurzweil and Diamandis, and he's attended the Singularity University conferences. So he's very much into AI. I'm wondering if Maitreya, if you ever reached out to him, I think the fact that you guys have the connection with hip hop would be a great way to approach him and maybe really expand on that. I'm just curious if that's something that you've ever tried or have done, or have you talked to him?
I'm very aware of will.i.am. I'm aware. I've seen him on Singularity Institute. I know he likes AI, but he's an extremely big artist. That guy is very humble. I would love to work with him, but I don't know anyone that knows him. And I'm pretty good at getting in contact with people, but will.i.am is very hard. I don't know anybody in my network that knows him except for maybe Ray Kurzweil. He's hard to get in contact with too.
Hey, I know Ray.
I would love
let's see if we can make that connection happen. I'll see what I can do.
I would appreciate it because I really like that guy. And the hip hop community loves him too.
This question of whether a dystopic or anti-heroic narrative is shaping history negatively, it's an interesting one. Fiction is an area where this has been we've gone from the heroic to the anti-heroic sort of narrative the last 200 years, but music is an area where that's tended to resist that. But I'm inclined to think that whatever we're doing in entertainment, we're suspending disbelief when we engage in it. I don't watch something like Upload, which has dystopian elements, because quaking in fear. I watch it because it's enjoyable, and when it's over, I finish suspending disbelief. So I don't see this as being a danger exactly, but there's certainly I think that creativity and seeing that new ideas are proliferated throughout culture, that is the best thing that we can do, and maybe dystopian fiction is a bit less creative than some other forms of science fiction or fiction in some cases. It's a zombie story is exciting. Does it really present a lot of new ideas to the general population? I'm not sure.
Indeed. And I think based on your comments, Ben, and what Charlie pointed out, a lot of the reason why dystopian science fiction is so popular is because it's easier to write a story with conflict in it. If you're living in a dystopian world and there is danger everywhere, there are threats you have to contend with on a regular basis, it's easier to create some sort of action-filled drama from that than if you live in a world that is better than our own and life generally proceeds more smoothly. So where do you find the conflict? Where do you find the dramatic tension? That takes creativity. Now, I believe it can be done. I believe it can be done really well. And writers, filmmakers, artists need to think more intensely about ways in which those kinds of visions can be achieved, because ultimately those would be far greater creative accomplishments. If done right, those stories could be a lot more fascinating because they're unique. They're not the same zombie apocalypse story that is frankly just tired right now. And we all know what it is. And it doesn't, at least not to me, have that same appeal as a truly original storyline where the conflict might be a bit more nuanced or more subtle or more intellectual in nature, but still in a way that drives the plot forward. Aubrey de Grey has expressed an idea for a science fiction story, and he has said he doesn't have the time to write this or create other products based on it, so he has kind of left it open for anyone in the community to develop it. But think about a story of a future society where radical super longevity has been achieved, where there's no biological aging anymore, people live for as long as they like, and then somebody introduces aging into that society. Somehow it starts coming back, and that's the conflict. That's the element in there that would lead to tension and lead to problems. But Alex, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question for Pavel, since he's been doing this work on othering and the zombies. I think that the whole zombie theme is sort of a subtle way of othering different people. And it, I see everybody being passive eugenicists, just hoping that the annoying people will die of COVID or die in a riot. I'm sick of this. I mean, how do we have any kind of unity? Oh, by the way, we're in the middle of a revolution, but we're still seeing each other as zombies, and both the left and the right are fed up for different reasons. And how do we unify and get a better result instead of just tearing everything down? You know, the science community has said that since COVID, research has slowed to about 30% just because they can't get in labs, say. And I'm just afraid that all this work we've done is going to get knocked down by chaos and dystopian things. So I guess, what was that, back to Pavel?
Well, I think
how do we get rid
Ray Kurzweil,
Ray
Kurzweil would really tend to disagree with you on this view of the arc of history. You know, he's pointed out that during the Second World War, you might have assumed that there would be a change in the way that technological progress advanced, but it's not really reflected when you look at that curve. It's pretty constant, this takeoff trajectory, and I'm not inclined to think that something like a scientist being out of the lab for a few months. I mean, there's an awful lot of arguments that are being made that say that this is a catalyst for a greater technological progress, and I'm inclined to give those equal merit.
So Pavel, what do you think about Alex's question in regard to othering as well as the current chaos, and how we can salvage the good work that our movement has done in the face of widespread deterioration of conditions?
Well, I think the othering can be overcome through dialogue, through see each other and recognize that we are human beings, that we're alive, and we value to each other. The problem with zombie movies that the zombie eats other, and you not value their lives. You just have to shoot them in the head, and that's to solve the problem. And you're not engaged in a dialogue. You're not talking to the zombies. Like, what's the difference? Like, why you want to eat me? What's the who you are? And yeah, I think the way to overcome the potential social disasters through engaging in dialogue, through hip hop, for example.
It's why Star Trek will always be better than Star Wars.
So Pavel, you actually gave us a great idea for science fiction, maybe still somewhat dystopian because there would be a zombie invasion of some sort in it, but maybe the zombies can talk. Maybe the zombies can formulate thoughts, and somehow a dialogue with the zombies is possible, and perhaps this could have a good ending in that somehow through this dialogue there's a resolution of tensions. The invasion is averted.
That was the premise of the third George Romero zombie movie. But you know, the this idea that narratives are in decay, fictional narratives are in decay. I'm not sure. I mean, this is just a feature. You know, so there's a lot of rock songs or pop songs that you make me feel something. When I look at the lyrics, sometimes I'm thinking it seems like it's verging on complete nonsense. This art form is different from a narrative. A narrative requires something to be overcome, conflict, and so it's. Just my feeling is I don't see this idea of narratives being in decline, but one person's opinion.
Well, I think there's been a proliferation of narratives, and it's not that they're in decline. The good narratives are still there. It's just they're essentially not as prominent as some of the stale dystopian narratives. But David, what did you want to say?
I just wanted to quickly interject about the zombies. I love this idea of the zombies and the others. But I think there's a serious parallel there too that struck me while you were talking, Pavel, and that's that people immediately in a zombie story, movie, video game assume that the zombie has no value whatsoever. The zombie is only an enemy, can only do damage to me. So if we were to write a science fiction story with zombies in it, let's find some intrinsic quality that they have that we need, and it's in our best interest to do whatever it is we do with the zombies and show that something even as ridiculous as zombies can be brought into the whole.
Indeed. Well, it could be related to radical life extension because somehow the zombies are undead. They were previously dead.
Perfect.
I just want to add about the narratives and how to bring in drama and the conflict. We can consider the death or agent as an antagonist, or death of our sun is an antagonist, or death as a thermal death of the universe as our antagonist, and we can build the heroic Prometheus level narratives, how we using technology overcome this like furiously fighting with these antagonists, and we don't have to anthropomorphize them. We can just challenge the gods or nature laws.
Yes, I think that is definitely a promising direction for a fiction of the future to go in. And indeed, right now, we are living through a situation where we have this kind of antagonist that cannot be personalized. There's no way to posit that the novel coronavirus has thoughts or feelings or valid points that it could be making. That is a pure enemy, but it doesn't have any of the higher aspects of consciousness or sentience that we would value. So that's the kind of antagonist that humankind should strive against, and making more films, writing more literature about that can definitely shift the cultural perception of science fiction. There was, interestingly enough, a mural in the city of Minsk, the capital of Belarus, where they do have humans with giant nails, actually, because this mural was created by a pub called Nail, Gvost in Russian. And this pub was advertising these humans with nails attacking giant coronaviruses, and the coronaviruses had faces and they were kind of recoiling from the nails. But it was a very powerful image because it does harness this dynamic of fighting a war against the enemy, except in this case, the enemy, really doesn't have any redeeming characteristics. It's just bad and out to destroy us. So in any event, we've had a great conversation today for nearly 2 hours, and I think it's time to get some closing comments. Before we get to the participants on this call, Mike L. in the chat made an amusing remark. We better hope we don't get sentient viruses or diseases. Imagine if they were racist or something like that. So yeah, I agree. That would be bad if viruses started to have consciousness and attack people in some sort of intelligent, selective way. They would be a lot more destructive. One of our main advantages against COVID-19 and other diseases is that we're smart and they're not. We can develop tools to fight them, and they just follow their genetic programming blindly. And I hope that that will continue. But in any event,
I think that this coronavirus scenario was an early warning to us of such a development. We are at a point of existential risk being very real because of a lack of biodefense. And that's maybe been the case for many decades, but it's becoming something that's available at the prosumer level. We need to find ways to combat that. And much of that it revolves around a trust problem. We need to become more cooperative. We need to become more, dare I say, collectivist. I'm not entirely convinced that the human race will exist by the turn of the 22nd century. But we need to do what we can to see that it does.
And also, I think it's important, though, to emphasize individual innovation and creativity. And that's not something that one typically associates with collectivism. That's a function of greater freedom and greater diversity, where we have different approaches to solving problems, and some of them may succeed, some of them may fail, some of them may succeed partially, they may work within certain cultures or subcultures. And for instance, the hip hop approach toward convincing people to pursue super longevity could be very different from, say, an academic approach or an approach taken in other cultural segments. Say there's an association of classical musicians that support super longevity. I hope there is one, because they could be very compelling in their arguments. What if Mozart had lived longer? What if Beethoven had lived longer? What sorts of wonderful works could they have created, or what sorts of projects could they have completed? So that would be another cultural approach toward life extension advocacy that is different from hip hop, but could be complementary, and that they could target the same goals ultimately. I also wanted to bring up a comment that John Carrots posted in our private Zoom chat, but I think it's useful to share that with the rest of the audience because it relates to science fiction. So Ad Vitam is the latest French Netflix sci-fi series that raises a lot of questions around death and humanity, set in a futuristic world where death has been cured and people can now live forever. Some people start doing suicide to die again by destroying much of their brains to be revived. He also mentions in a zombie TV show and comic book, zombies live and work with people. So it seems like there are some science fiction works that explore these possibilities already. Hopefully they'll become more common, and these interesting thought experiments can be promulgated in a not uniformly dystopian light. But in any event, let's open this up to further closing comments. Charlie, what thoughts do you have about this entire conversation? Anything you want to add to it or finish with?
Yes. Well, first, let me just mention, for your benefit, maybe we can get Alma Deutscher to become a transhumanist. You know, she'd be great for the future of the movement.
She would be absolutely wonderful for the future of the movement, and I think she is actually transhuman, but might not know it yet.
Yeah, with the abilities that she has, she must be transhuman. For anybody who doesn't know, she's an amazing classical composer, performer, and she's only about 15 years old, and you can Google her and watch her. It's amazing. You know, I wanted to say a couple of things besides that. With regard to, it's almost like we're talking about putting together a plot for a movie. You know, interestingly, over periods of time, sometimes what was considered good guys become bad guys, and that was the case for American Indians. They were always, in old Western movies, they were the bad guys, and then eventually you had movies like Dances with Wolves, and society started to realize how American history was painted by winners, and maybe it wasn't really what it was. And now you can see those things change, and I think that happens. It's happening with robots. You know, robots were bad guys when you had Terminators or somebody killing people, and now you got Westworld, where they're the sympathetic characters. I think when I did any of my music videos or films, for example, in the first one, or one of the ones I did, the Radical Life Extension music video, the bad guys, I made the Luddites. They were called Luddites. It was the Luddite Police Patrol, and the good guy was Dr. Radlix, the character I created, who was supposed to be a futurist, and he was able to solve the problem of aging. So it's all, you know, it can be done to make it, you know, we can have conflict. We just got to make the futurists the good guys and make the bad guys all the things we don't like. Like I did in one of my last ones where I did Death was the bad guy and Cryonics was the good guy. So another thing I wanted to address that we mentioned with regard to zombies, Ray Kurzweil is going to be coming out with his new book, The Singularity is Nearer. It was supposed to come out this year. It's still tentatively scheduled, but because of this COVID thing, we're going to see where that's going to land. But in the book, he does discuss consciousness, and he is there's a chapter in there where there's a comparative to zombies, and how, you know, without consciousness, what is it that makes us human? So there, and he brings in he talks about David Chalmers, who's a current philosopher that talks about what it means to be conscious. So that's a book coming out later on. I'm sure all of us that are listening to this will probably have a really good interest in reading. But I think what Maitreya is doing is a great thing, and in reaching out to a bigger, broader community that we don't normally have associated with us. And I think if there's a way for me to help in any way, try to get him in touch with Will.i.am, I think I'll do what I can. So that's what I wanted to say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm glad that these virtual enlightenment salons have become a venue for these kinds of bridges to be built, and perhaps future opportunities to be utilized in continuing to grow our movement and creating these collaborations that might take it to the next level. So now let us go for closing remarks to David.
Yeah, thank you, Gennady. I want to agree with you as far as the bridging between different communities is concerned. And I want to say to Maitreya, thank you so much for coming today and talking. I didn't really realize the parallels between the hip hop community and what I see with the transhumanist community. And I find that there are quite a few. And I love the fact that your work in superlongevity, which is an area near and dear to my heart as well. So thank you, and you've opened my thoughts along the lines of who else can we parallel ourselves with? Let's create a big community by knitting these communities together that have so much in common. It's so easy to understand you and to understand where you're coming from, because I feel kindred from my particular viewpoint outside the hip hop community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I would like to echo those statements. Now, Alex, what closing thoughts do you have regarding this conversation?
I just want everyone to stay safe in the coming weeks, not only from the COVID, but from this revolution we're having. And I want us to help lead us out the other side of it in a more productive way. That's about it.
Yes, absolutely. And I certainly would encourage everybody to remain safe, to think about how you can remain constructive and productive and helpful to people despite the very difficult times that we're living through, and how we can continue the flow of communication and conversation and the building of bridges, because too many people are burning bridges right now. We need to be building them. We need to be the ones that maintain our civilization, maintain our technological infrastructure for the good of all, including the people who have been historically disadvantaged, because we want them to achieve more, to live longer, to live healthier, to live better as well. This future is for everybody. That's the transhumanist vision. So now let's see if either Pam or John would like to say anything, because they've been on the call, but I don't know if they're immediately present. So we'll give them a moment. And if not, we'll go to Pavel for his closing remarks, and then finally to Maitreya to close us out. So Pam or John, anything from you? All right, it doesn't seem so. So let us hear from Pavel. What are your thoughts?
Well, building bridges, that's what we should do. And not only between each other, but also with our past. I like what Maitreya want to do with the history of the culture, to show people that humanity in different culture, which is not necessarily connected to each other, express this dream of immortality, express the dream of overcoming death. And it starts from an episode of Gilgamesh and ancient Egyptian culture. In any religion you can look at, it's all about achieving immortality and overcoming death. And I think Maitreya doing a great job of telling this narrative of the transhumanism, of the presence of the transhumanism in different forms and different cultures throughout the history of humanity.
Yes, absolutely. I think the perspective that Maitreya can provide will greatly enrich our movement, because Maitreya is very well read and he studies history, and he's able to bring up historical parallels that many of us wouldn't immediately think of, but nonetheless they are there, and they add to our understanding of how the longevity movement came to be and the many paths by which it got to its present state, as well as paths that haven't been explored sufficiently yet, connections that haven't been drawn to the extent we need them to be drawn in order to attract more people to our movement. So with that, Maitreya, let's hear your concluding thoughts about this discussion. What do you think were some key ideas from it? What else would you like to say? And what would you like to for people to take away from it?
I would like to say thank you for everyone for your encouragement and your kind words, first off, because it's very hard when you're trying to get these ideas to the public, because some people don't want to hear it. And I've had a lot of death recently, and I work in hospice, so this gives me encouragement to keep moving on. I really would like us to create businesses ourselves and raise the money ourselves for this timeship project collectively, because this, I'm gonna be honest with you, man, this is the most important thing to me in my whole life. Just to see the time, I don't want to make more money off of it. Just to see the timeship built will bring me great joy. I would love to see all of us working toward the whole Life Extension community to work towards this goal and of achieving the building of this timeship project. Please, I think this is the key to us even solving some of our problems. And reach out to Bill, write Bill, tell him, look, man, we got to get this done. What can I do? Write him, speak to him. Talk to Stephen Valentine. You know, you can go to timeship.org and he will respond to you. He's very good at that. He's a very humble guy, and he loves to hear feedback from you guys. So please, I would love to see everyone working towards this agenda of building the timeship. It's very important.
Absolutely. So please, everyone, look up information about the timeship, its history, the design. It's a fascinating subject. Now, Ben, let's go to you and have you say a few words about our next Virtual Enlightenment Salon a week from today, and our guest at that salon, Jim Stroll.
Yes. Yes, we have an incredible guest next week, Jim Stroll of RadFest, a man who needs a little introduction among our loyal listeners. And he has agreed to come on the show on Sunday. And we're going to be discussing some unique life extension strategies, a little bit similar to today's conversation, talking about some of these cultural factors, as well as the technology itself. And I'm very much looking forward to that. I would encourage you to please invite your friends, and that's going to be a great show. And you know, I'm heartened by all of the things that have been said in the course of this talk. But you know, there was some talk of dystopia and some talk of the world today. It's a present day dystopia. We've never lived in a very good world. Even though these things have improved rather dramatically since the advent of the networked world, there's still 1 billion people on this earth who will live and die in sheer misery on the current trajectory. That is not a perfect world. And if you're asking yourself what is to be done at this time in history, just about 48 hours ago, the White House barricade was breached by protesters. You could say that the White House came within a hair's breadth of being burned to the ground. That doesn't happen in a country that has a universal basic income and universal health care. It simply doesn't. Places like Germany that have social safety net programs are not in danger of being burned to the ground at this time. And we need to do better as a people. We need to do better as futurists, I feel. I would encourage you to please go to transhumanist-party.org/membership. Sign up today. The Techno-Futurist Project has a place for you. And that is, of course, as Chairman Stolyarov mentioned, free and available to all the world around. I would encourage you also to go to benzion2020.com, the Futurist New Deal for America. We've been working on exactly these kind of programs well before some of these more pressing concerns came into focus. But we can address these things with programs like a universal basic income and like humane economic policies to see that the human race will survive the 22nd century. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Ben, for those closing remarks. Thank you to everybody for attending, to our officers for participating in this discussion, to Alex, to Maitreya One, our guest of honor today. We have learned a lot from you about the Timeship project, about life extension advocacy, about the hip hop culture. And I think to everybody who will watch this later, this will be a valuable video to gain these kinds of perspectives. So please keep coming back to it. Refer your friends, your acquaintances to it, these are important conversations that we have been having and we will continue to have in our weekly virtual enlightenment salons. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful remainder of your weekend. Stay safe.